Students, welcome to Shore Obsess classes. So this is Himadri Datta. So in today's lecture we'll be talking about international economics. So we'll be focusing on a topic called effects of transfer on terms of trade. So in today's lecture we'll be looking at what? We'll be looking at effects of transfer effects of a transfer on the terms of trade. So what are the effects of a transfer on terms of trade that we need to figure out? So for this, first we need to know that, say A is a country, say for an example America, and there is another country that is B, say it is Britain. So there are two countries, America and Britain. Now we know if A makes transfer of some of its income to B, now if A transfers some of its income to B, what happens is that A's income is reduced and a fall in A's export is inevitable. So what will happen is A's income is reduced, and fall in A's exports is inevitable. Falling A's exports is inevitable. Now we know the shift in national division of world spending may lead to a shift in world relative demand and thus affect the terms of trade. Now we know this shift in the national division of world we know the shift in this national division of world spending may lead to a shift in world relative demand. Maybe it lead to a shift in world relative demand, thus affect the terms of trade. And it affects what? It affects the terms of trade. So the key point here is what? The transfer of income. So the transfer of income leads to what? The transfer of income shifts the RF curve. It shifts the relative demand curve. So it shifts the world relative demand, which affect the terms of trade. So now the only effect of transfer of income is the shift in RD, that is relative demand curve. However, the RD curve does not necessarily shift when world income is redistributed. So this RD curve necessarily does not shift when world income is simply redistributed. So when world's income is simply redistributed, this does not take place. So this does not take place. So why so? Because this is Olin's point. So this is basically whose point? This is Olin's point. So what is his point? His point is basically, if A allocates its extra income between clothes and food in the same proportion, then B reduces its spending, then the world spending on clothes and food will remain unchanged and RD curve will not shift. That is, the terms of trade will not appear. So how the RD curve won't be affected? It is if A allocates its extra income between clothes and food, same proportion that B reduces its spending, same proportion to that B reduces its spending, then the world spending on clothes and food will remain unchanged. Then the world spending on food and clothes remain unchanged. And what happens? RD curve will not shift, and RD curve will not shift, and we know the RD curve will not shift. So what happens is that if A and B do not allocate their change in spending in the same proportion, however, there will be a terms of trade effect. This direction of effect will depend on difference in A's and B's spending pattern. Suppose A allocates a higher proportion of a marginal shift in expenditure to B than to clothes than B does. This means A has a higher marginal propensity to spend on clothes than B. So what happens? This says that if A allocates a higher proportion of a marginal shift in expenditure so if A allocates a higher proportion of a marginal shift in expenditure to clothes than B does, this means A has a higher marginal propensity to spend on clothes than B, which eventually says A has a higher marginal propensity to spend A has a higher marginal propensity to spend on cloth then B. On cloth then B. So from here we know correspondingly B must have a lower marginal propensity to spend on food than at any given relative price. A's transfer payment to B reduce the world demand for cloth and increases world demand for food. So if there is a transfer of payment from A to B, what happens? As B have a lower marginal propensity to spend on food, as B has lower marginal propensity to spend on food, as a result what happens? As a result, the world demand for clothes increases world demand for, so it reduces the world demand for cloth as cloth production takes place in A. This reduction in cloth production, and there is increase in food production, and there is increase in food production. Now we know what that. First of all, what we have to do is we'll simply have to draw a diagram, and it will be easier for you to understand the concept. So we'll simply draw a diagram. So in this diagram there is RS, there is RD2, and there is RD1. Accordingly we get the relative price of cloth, because we measure relative price of cloth on the vertical axis, and quantity, relative quantity of cloth. Which is basically given by QC plus QC star by QF plus QF star. So it looks like this. Now what it says basically that as B must have a lower marginal propensity to spend on food when at any given relative price. So at any given relative price, say the relative price is here at A1 at this point, what happens is that the B must have a lower marginal propensity to spend. Now a transfer of payment from A to B, a transfer of payment from A to B does what? A transfer of payment from A to B reduces the world demand for cloth. It reduces so it does what? It reduces the world's demand for cloth and increases world's demand for food, and it increases world's demand for food. Jesus Christ, you believe that? So now here what happens is that, so the RD curve shift leftward, as you can see, it shifts leftward to RD2. The world trading equilibrium shift from point 1 to 2 from 1 to 2, and what happens is that the shift lowers the relative price of cloth from A dash to A, worsening A's terms of trade. So it worsen what? It worsen A's terms of trade. So it worsen A's terms of trade, while improving B's terms of trade because it export cloth. Now this is the case which Keynes described. The indirect effect of an international transfer or terms of trade reinforce its original effect of income of two countries. There is, however, another point. If A has a lower marginal propensity to spend on clothes, a transfer from A to B shifts the RD curve to rightward. It shifts the RD curve to rightward. Now A's terms of trade at B's expenses improve. This effect offset both negative effect on A's income and positive effect on B's income. Generally, a transfer worsens the donor's terms of trade if donor has a high marginal propensity to spend on its export good than recipient. So the thing which we need to understand from here is that what exactly we need to understand, that is, generally what happens, a transfer worsen the donors terms of trade if the donor has a high marginal propensity to spend on the good on its export goods. So now we'll do a quick review of what we have done. We are investigating the effects of transfer on terms of trade. So we are investigating the effects of transfer on terms of trade. As you can see, there is a transfer of payment to B. So now here B must have a lower marginal propensity to spend on food, so that what happens is that a transfer of payment from A to B, given the assumption that A allocates higher proportion of marginal shift in expenditure to cloth than B does. So in this case what happens, the relative demand curve shifts leftward. As you can see in the relative demand curve, it shifts to the leftward at this point. So the terms of trade of A, which says what? Terms of trade of A deteriorates. Why? Because the donor, that is the one, that is A here, is transferring the income, has high marginal propensity to spend on clothes. So I hope you guys have understood it, how that transfer affect the terms of trade. If you still have any query or doubt, you can WhatsApp me on this number, which is 9836793076, or you can also go to our website, which is www.showroobsearchclasses.com. There you will find a lot of other videos like this, and you will also get to see a lot of other materials which are needed for different entrance exams. So thank you for watching this video and have a nice day ahead.